Welcome to the third entry in the Digital Foundry Developers series, brought to you in association with Barclays. The idea here being to bring you new and interesting stories about video games, their creators and the ways in which they are made. The focus in this video is Recompile by Phigames. Personally, I first became aware of the game when a trailer debuted on the PlayStation YouTube channel. Recompile looked original, distinct. It's been clearly marketed as a next-gen only title. And for the journalist within me, I got the idea that there was a genuinely fascinating story to share here. So I found out more about the game, then contacted Phigames, and between 2020 lockdowns, I visited a small town near Manchester, UK to meet a couple of key team members and find out more about the title. In this video, we'll be talking about a multi-year process in developing the core game, encompassing years worth of prototype work alone, and how gradually a team was put together to fully realise the potential of a next-gen only project. We'll be taking a look at how Phigames uses the Unity engine and its high-end HDRP renderer, how the technology has been enhanced and embellished, and yeah, we're going to be talking through the process of porting the game too. This is the story of Recompile, as told by the people who are making it.
My name is Phigames and I'm the founder and director of Phigames, and we're currently working on Recompile, which is a Metroidvania-inspired 3D sci-fi hacking adventure. So I've always wanted to make a game about an entity trapped inside a virtual world, and the only way that they could progress is to hack the environment and survive. And I've always been really interested in being inside a computer, just from childhood memories of films like Tron and TV series like Reboot and reading books by Gillian Rubenstein and stuff like that. It's always been fascinating to me what it would be like to have a story set inside a computer.
So you can think of Recompile kind of like a next-gen Metroidvania, if you like, albeit one that's very different and unique in many different ways. But it's this concept of a stylized virtual world that gives it a distinct visual identity.
So in Recompile, you're a sentient virus, and eventually you realize that you're there to be a catalyst to create the first sentient AI in the world. And there's lots of kind of antivirus machines and other programs that are trying to stop you from getting to that. So you can collect items to help you with that. So there's weapons such as deletion rifles, there's traditional kind of Metroidvania abilities like double jump, dash, flying, that kind of thing. And there's also a hacking mechanic as well, where you're able to freeze the gameplay at any time and then inspect objects around the player and hack them. For example, you can hack enemies to turn them against each other. You can hack puzzles to allow you to bypass obstacles in different ways. And you can also hack the environment to build bridges or buildings to allow you to traverse physical obstacles as well.
All of this is built on the technological foundation that is the Unity engine. It's a technology that's often used in indie development and fated for the level of accessibility offered to developers of all sizes and competence levels, but also somewhat controversial here at Digital Foundry. But on the flip side, Moon Studios' custom Moonity engine, built on Unity but customized, well, this is a simply astonishing game. More recently, Oddworld Soulstorm has also impressed us. Again, it's 100% Unity. Developers have built long and successful careers around this engine.
So it made a lot of sense to me to use Unity because C# was so accessible for me as a Java developer, as an AS3 coder. I just got really on board with Unity from that point. I made my first game called Tiny Keep, which was a kind of Kickstarter funded dungeon crawling game, and that was my first game with my company Phigames. After that, I just stuck with Unity for the whole time. It's great for platforms. So it's very easy to create a game in Unity and then export to the different devices that you want to support.
And this portability is where we bring in our second contributor to the story. Recompile is developed primarily on PC, but always with one eye towards running on PlayStation 5 and both of the Xbox Series consoles.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alex Rose. I'm working on Recompile with Phi. we're working together. I'm handling tool dev, ports, and stuff like that. I started on Unity in 2011. I was still in university, I was studying physics, and I'd just learned C++. And I'd been making games since I was about 4 to 5 years old, but I didn't know how to program until uni. And then as like 2 months into my C++ syllabus, I was like, I can actually make a game now, probably. So I downloaded Unity, which was C#, but it's near enough, and just started making games. I released a mobile game in 2013. I did a bunch of Ludum Dares and won a big Ludum Dare, and then released a game called Super Rebel Resurrection in 2017. And yeah, I'm just fully into the Unity ecosystem. Like, I'm tied in with it in like inextricable. I don't even know how to say that, but yeah, I'm now one with Unity, and I know the whole API. I'm the Unity guy.
Phi and Alex are 2 team members in the Recompile development effort, a group of talented coders, artists and musicians recruited over time as the project expanded in scope. But to fully understand the game as you've seen it so far, we need to go back, right the way back to 2015 in fact, where work began on a series of prototypes. So this is fascinating stuff. Recompile actually started out life as Fort Mainframe, a very, very different game.
So I first prototyped what's now Recompile in 2014, after I finished my first game, Tiny Keep. As I said, I've always wanted to make a game about being stuck in a virtual world and having to play a hacked environment, and the first game was a turn-based puzzle game where the player can't move, but the only thing you can do is shift the environment around and corrupt various grid cells to block enemies and complete your objectives that way. But I decided to shelve that idea due to not being able to create effective designs for the different levels, and I realized that I was much better at making kind of action games, so I moved on to a different prototype after that. So the second prototype was made about a year later, 2015 or 2016, and it was a full isometric action platformer. So you control a character, you can do your stuff like jump and double jump dash and shoot things. And you can also hack your environment as well by shifting tiles around, very similar to the first prototype. I ended up doing all of the artwork, animation, rigging, coding and level design myself, which was pretty overwhelming and was the reason why I decided to stop that project, as I was getting frustrated with how the visuals in the game looked, because I'm not an artist by trade. I was more of a programmer, and I found that it took me too long to kind of get to the stage that I wanted with that game.
The next phase saw Phi start again from scratch, this time going back to basics, the idea being to create a prototype that would see him concentrate on his strengths, creating what you might call the canvas onto which other developers could contribute.
So with the third prototype, which I started in about 2017, was trying to recreate the previous one but with purely placeholder cubes. And that allowed me as a programmer to focus on coding gameplay mechanics and level design. And then I was able to take that prototype to a few friends of mine who took the cubes and created some artwork to kind of augment that gameplay that I created. So I met a VFX artist and an animator, James Marshall. I call him Vin, and he saw the prototype that I'd made with the cubes and instantly was interested in helping me out. Yeah, so from then on he would help me create the character designs, the various visual effects in the game, and helping out with the 3D modeling as well. And a lot of that initial kind of work with that artwork helped determine what Recompile looks like today. So I guess the first 4 years being a solo developer, where I was experimenting with different mechanics, different art styles, it took me a long time to get to the point where I am today, and I think that's mainly because of myself, having to do many things, wearing many hats, artwork, sound, programming, design, all that kind of thing. But as soon as I opened the project up to a few friends of mine who took care of things like audio and artwork, we started to progress pretty quickly to what Recompile looks like today, and it allowed me to focus on what I do best, and that's programming. So the character design, we brainstormed a few ideas. We didn't have a character artist at the time, and so we didn't have access to any kind of resources to create your traditional game character. But we did have Vin, who was a VFX artist and animator, and we came up with the idea where what if the character was just a load of animated particles, We prototyped that idea and we ended up with a voxel character with basically glowing cubes, and the character was made of pure energy. And we tested this out, recorded a video, posted it on Twitter, and I think the next day we got like 12,000 likes from that, and it went viral. And we were contacted by lots of different publishers and other people interested in investing in the game. So after that first kind of tease of what Recompile could have been, we decided to go full-time with the project, and that character design has stayed with the game since. It's pretty much an iconic kind of look at the visual style of the game now.
So collaboration with other creatives was the catalyst in what I can only really describe as a quantum leap in Recompile's ongoing development. For MAINFRAME transitioned into a game that's something quite different, something recognisably Recompile, and it's where the beautiful aesthetic started to take shape. The project gained further momentum as more contributors came on board, bringing talents beyond programming and visual design.
So the soundtrack for Recompile, we wanted to focus more on the kind of epic journey of the character rather than what people would expect from a game like this. We try not to use as much kind of electronic music in the game, to focus more on kind of orchestral. Richard Evans, my sound designer and composer, he studied interactive music design for games as part of his PhD. And together, actually, we built a pretty unique dynamic music engine that allows the music soundtrack to react and adapt to the action going on in the game in real time.
So there's a very small core team going about the daily business of developing Recompile, but further contributors came on board, radically shifting the scale, scope and content of the game.
It started off, obviously as me as a solo dev, trying to make everything myself, to meeting Vin and Richard to help with the audio and some of the visual effects. And then we've expanded the team further because we wanted to make a game that really takes advantage of next gen. So I got on board, for example, Gary Lloyd. He's a 3D artist and mostly an environmental artist, and he really specializes in abstract 3D environments, which is something that Recompile really needs. Lots of different environmental artists are very much into photorealistic, forests and foliage and stuff like that. So it was really hard to find someone who could create something a little bit more abstract. We also got on board Jasmine Streetfield. She's a organic environmental artist, and she's really, really good at creating trees and rocks and flowers and any kind of like organic stuff. So we've managed to incorporate those elements into the game as well. Because before Jasmine joined the team, our environments were mostly kind of cold and sterile until we had those kind of natural looking assets into the game. So we also brought on a pretty prolific comic artist, her name is Faye Sims, to help out with writing and narrative for Recompile's story, and also create this awesome concept art for Gary and Jasmine based on their skills in comic art as well.
And beyond that, a further contributor tapped into some of Faye's existing technology to make his own mark on the visual makeup of Recompile.
So there's one thing I'm really proud of in the game, and that's the UI system. We've built a completely bespoke custom UI framework called FOS, which is a text-based ASCII framework. And essentially every character on the screen on a 110 by 44 grid can be independently animated. And that's given us the ability to create these kind of retro futuristic terminal consoles. So it's given Recompile a very unique aesthetic on the UI side. I released this framework open source a few years back, and one day I got an email from the front man of a band called 65 Days of Static. His name is Paul Walensky, and he told me that he used the FOS framework to create his music videos for 65 Days Static. And as soon as I saw them, I was absolutely amazed at how cool they looked, and we got to talking, and I invited him to use his design skills to make the UI for Recompile. So now he's officially joined our team.
And of course, we've already met Alex Rose, whose primary responsibility for Recompile rests in the porting process, bringing a game primarily designed on PC to the PS5 and Xbox Series consoles. However, his experience within the Unity ecosystem actually means he's contributing a lot more than porting alone.
So yeah, with Recompile, it's actually a lot of new stuff I've never done before in Unity, because typically when I'm working for myself, I try and just make the things I need bespoke at the time. Whereas now with Fee, he just needs more hands on board. So we need someone who's going to quickly make tools where you can quickly put together pipe systems or put loads of environment art all together, like placing prefabs, a music system that's dynamic, and things like that he doesn't have full time for because he's working on the game. It gives me time to see the back end and start making back end tools, which is really interesting. Because it ends up being a lot like game design, except you're trying to predict what a dev wants instead of what a gamer wants to see. The amount of tooling I have built over the past 10 years is just, I could not work with default Unity at this point because I'm using so much of my own tools, but at the same time I don't like to use other people's third-party tools because like when your game updates and you're using someone else's tool, that's the thing that's going to break. Whenever I'm porting, it's usually third-party software, which we can't get away from, like middleware for things like input or sound. Usually that's what breaks when you update to a new build. But if you write the code mostly yourself, then you can normally fix it quite quickly.
So we've looked at the entire prototype timeline here. We've seen how MAINFRAME evolved into Recompile over several years, and how expanding the development team helped to extend the scope of the title. The 2019 code looked solid. A time-limited playable demo even went out on Steam, and having seen it in action myself, I was pretty impressed. But you might have noticed that the overall aesthetic of this code isn't quite a match for some of the footage seen earlier in this video. In actual fact, another fundamental shift occurred, the final key transition, and one that transformed the look of the game once again.
So in 2020, we decided to move to the latest version of Unity, and with that came switching to the new HDRP renderer.
HDRP, that's really sick. Fee knows more about it though.
High definition render pipeline.
In case anyone's wondering what that is, it's a high definition render pipeline.
Before that, we were using the standard legacy renderer, which was what most Unity projects are developed in. But with HDRP, it gave us access to much more advanced graphical features, such as inbuilt volumetrics, subsurface scattering, temporal anti-aliasing, motion blurring, all of that stuff out of the box. We no longer had to use kind of third-party external assets to accomplish these things. And it also led the way for us to experiment with more next-gen technologies as well. So what I'd love to do is to take Recompile, which is a very abstract kind of indie art style game, something that looks very simple, but use a modern graphics technology stack to render that game, which I don't think a lot of indie companies are doing at the moment.
So for Phigames, the shift away from Unity 5's legacy graphics to the HDRP render pipeline, it's a crucial component in delivering the next-gen look of the game, but I was kind of curious about this. After all, to make a next-gen only game, to basically lock yourself out of a last-gen market that starts with over 110 million PlayStation 4 consoles out there. It's a gutsy move, right?
I mean, HDRP is supported on current gen. I'm worried that there may not be feasibility in terms of performance optimization due to the way the game is built. You know, we're not using any kind of light mapping. You know, we don't bake textures or lighting or anything like that. Everything is dynamic in real time. It actually works for us better to use HDRP than it is to kind of go back to those old ways of doing things.
Early doors, PC has been the primary platform for Recompile development. It's the solid, reliable standard on which to build during a time of transition in the console business. But the move to a parallel multi-platform development environment kicked off in 2020, when development kits for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles finally became available. PS5 kits arrived first, and what could have been a troubled time for the team turned out to be somewhat smoother than envisaged.
I will say I was astonished, and I had to film my reaction when I first got this game running on the PS5 because I couldn't believe all of it just worked. Like, the input just worked, the audio just worked, it was a healthy frame rate, we were running at 4K. We needed optimization on 4K to make it run quicker, but like, we had a running game immediately. Like, there's always a hurdle when you first port a game. Your first 30 builds are not gonna run. I have like a black screen, or the controller won't work, or normally there's a lot of time spent just building over and over again, just trying to get it to run anything. And then you'll spend the next 20 builds. You'll cut everything out of your game until you have nothing, get that to run, and then slowly build up on top until you realize what's wrong. But here, The first build, I had Fee round to my house immediately. I was like, dude, this is working. And he was like, okay, and he came round the next day and we bought a 4K cable because we didn't have that yet. And then it just ran and it was pretty beautiful. When we got the UI up and we had it running in 4K on the screen, we just see it in such high detail and we were really close to the TV. It was quite beautiful and it did suddenly strike us as like, okay, yeah, this is a next-gen title now.
But what of porting in general? I mean, you can argue that Digital Foundry has charted the hits and misses of cross-platform development for well over a decade now. But we're still very much outsiders looking in. We're assessing final code. So what's the score from the developer's perspective? And how is it working with Unity in particular?
I've got in trouble before from other devs who work at bigger companies who think that I'm being a bit flippant when I talk about porting, because I do actually think that porting is easier than it's made out to be. But that's because I use Unity, right? Like, I'm not having to write these tools like someone else has written engine tools that will just export. In a way, there is a lot where you can just click a button and things will work. So for instance, this time round, we had really almost no problems with shaders, and normally shaders are a big thing when you port to console. You've got to rewrite everything. There were a couple of little things, but it was a day's work. In general, it's been a pretty streamlined porting experience for the next gen, but I've ported to the previous gen, so it's a similar ecosystem. So if you're able to do a port to last gen, it's pretty streamlined to be able to then port to this gen. So I think in terms of that, they've done a really good job. You know, you're not having to learn a new website, you're not having to learn new tools. It's largely like the same stuff, but just more advanced and more options available.
Meanwhile, rewinding a touch, the positive reaction to Recompile on social media and elsewhere brought the title and Phigames to the attention of publishers, who could help immensely by fostering relationships with the platform holders, marketing the game, and much more.
After we announced the game in 2018, we met up with a few people who were interested in publishing the game, and we decided to go with a company called Dear Villagers. They're a very new kind of publisher, specializing in kind of mid-core to hardcore PC games, premium games. And they really helped us develop a relationship with platform holders such as Sony and Microsoft. And from that point, yeah, we were selected to attend various events such as Day of the Devs and GDC, and from there we made a lot of contacts there with Sony, for example, and they were really interested in bringing Recompile to the new consoles. The Xbox Series X is also on our radar as well, and we plan to release the game on both PS5 and Xbox Series X, and really excited to be able to use Unity's HDRP and all of those new graphical features on next-gen hardware.
It's something that perhaps came to the fore in the last console generation, but it's great to see that access to the latest and greatest technology isn't just the preserve of major publishers in the here and now. We're seeing smaller developers like Phigames get access to pre-release console hardware ahead of launch, and once NDAs are in place, next-gen support within engines like Unreal Engine 4 and Unity is available too. It's exciting to see a kind of democratization, not only in access to kit, but also in access to software that can put the new consoles through their paces. And while all of these next-gen features may not be fully utilized in Recompile, it's clear to see that developers are really excited about the possibilities of the new wave of machines.
Okay, the big things I'm excited about are NVMe. The last two generations, I think, are going to be seen as a dark time in gaming history, where we had these really long load times, especially 2 generations ago. But everything is much snappier now. Everything loads much quicker, and it's a joy to work without hard drives. I never want to see a hard drive again, to be honest. The things that previously existed, like feels of controllers, it feels good to me. Everything just feels a bit more polished and nicer, and immediately, sometimes I pick up a new controller and I'm just like, it's a controller. But these do feel like a new generation to me. It feels like I'm working on something better than before. It doesn't just feel like a 1.5, it does feel like a new console generation to me.
But from my perspective, what I think is really cool from what I've seen so far from Recompile is that it has a distinct visual identity. It looks super fluid and impressive in motion, and that originality carries through to the gameplay. The Metroidvania genre is an established one at this point, but the combination of the style seen in the game and the injection of new ideas adds additional spice.
So with Recompile, we wanted to be the first game in the Metroidvania genre to have more than one linear path to progression. So we've included a dynamic narrative in the game where, depending on your play style, different physical paths open up, but also different narrative paths as well. And the game reacts to your playstyle in a dynamic way by spawning more enemies or opening different areas for you depending on how you like to play. For example, if you're an aggressive player versus if you're more of a stealthy pacifist player, you'd get a different ending and a different kind of route to progression as well. At the heart of the game, it's about creating the first ever sentient AI and the kind of story of humankind and how it reacts to the AI in the end. So we're really looking forward to telling that story from our perspective and give the player choices on what kind of AI they want to make.